If you're like me and you're a connoisseur of sports broadcasting, you're watching games, you're listening to games, you hear a wide array of broadcasters, and that's fun because we're all unique, we all have our different styles. But when you consume a lot of media, a lot of sports, a lot of radio and TV, you begin to start hearing patterns and you start to hear certain things over and over and over. And what I'm referring to here is mainly crutch words. Words that you hear broadcasters say again and again and again. And if you're like me, it starts to grate on you. It really starts to annoy you and take away and detract from your enjoyment of the game. And so when I work with students at Sportscasters Club, I've always talked about trying to be unique. And in so doing, when you're unique, you refrain from using these words that everybody else is using. So there is a particular list that I compiled. And in this episode of the Sportscasters Club online radio show, we talk about the 13 words a sports broadcaster should stay away from. And if you can do this, you will be unique. So enjoy this episode. Make sure to smash the like button. Also subscribe and enable notifications so when we put out these updates, these informative and educational videos, you can make sure that you're on the list and you'll get it right to your device. Enjoy this episode, and if you have any words you want to contribute and add to this list, be sure to let me know that too. If you're a sportscaster, you really need to stop using these words. Do you catch yourself? Do you hear when others say them? Are you using them constantly? Well, you need to stop.
Welcome to the Sportscasters Club radio show, where it's all about becoming a better sportscaster and a better sports fan. And now, your host, a man who began his sports broadcasting career way back in 1993, Rick Schultz.
Hello and welcome to another awesome, fantastic, terrific episode of the Sportscasters Club online radio show. I'm Rick Schultz. We welcome you in from Radio Land, wherever you listen to your podcast. I call it the online radio show. I really got that from Dan Miller, if you follow him at the 48 Days online radio show. Awesome program. He's been doing this podcast that he's recorded for about 10 years now. Check out Dan, but that's why I call it the online radio show as opposed to a podcast. And we'll get into that at some other time because really, I mean, think about it. This is radio now. Radio is not so much turning on the AM or the FM in your car. It's now turning it on demand on your phone as you plug it into your vehicle, as you're walking, as you're out with the dog, as you're going about your daily life. Podcasts are now radio, and that's why we call it the online radio show. So today's episode, a really fun one and one that really hits home for me. The title of this episode, as you know, 13 crutch words a sportscaster should stay away from. What is a crutch word? We're going to start there. We're going to define what is a crutch word, and then we're going to go through some specifics that you really want to stay away from. We're going to talk about sports. We're going to point out all these crutch words, and I bet after this episode, you're going to say, you know what? I've always heard these words when I turn on the radio, turn on the TV, but now they stick in my mind, and now you're really going to notice them. It's kind of like when you go shopping for a vehicle, and then all of a sudden, let's say I go looking for a Honda Ridgeline, and then for the next week, every car I see seems to be a Honda Ridgeline. That's the way this is going to be with crutch words and the words that you hear come out of sportscasters' mouths as you listen to radio and TV. And I will even tell you the crutch word that I need to stop using. And I've had many over the course of my career. I started way back in, as you heard, 1993. I've had some different crutch words over the years, but there's one particular word that I'm battling with now, and I really am, and I'm being honest with you, and that's, we're all here to learn, right? So I will even touch on the crutch word that I need to stop using. I really will. So Stay tuned for that. We're going to define crutch words and then get into the 13 that you really need to stay away from. Have you ever wondered how you could start a career in sports broadcasting? We want to answer some of the questions you may have. You can download our free resource, our free ebook report called 7 Tips to Get Started in Sports Broadcasting. These will answer some questions you may have and give you a roadmap to start your sports broadcasting career. Plus, as a bonus, there are 3 myths that will shock most sports fans, and you get them as well in this report. That's our free report, 7 Tips to Get Started in Sports Broadcasting. Simply go to sportscastersclub.com and click on Free Stuff. That's sportscastersclub.com and click on Free Stuff to get the free report, 7 Tips to Get Started in Sports Broadcasting. All right, welcome back to the Sportscasters Club online radio show. Rick Schultz with you here in Radio Land. What is a crutch word? Let's start there. A crutch word is a word that a broadcaster uses, sometimes mindlessly, to fill space. It's a word that just comes out without thinking. It's the vocabulary that we use automatically that gets built into our everyday language. And we all have them, whether they be at home with our kids, with our spouse, at work, and certainly on the air. We all have crutch words that filter their way into our broadcasts. And what we need to do as a sportscaster is eliminate them. Get them out of there. It's never going to be 100%, but we want to make sure to eliminate them as much as possible. And so I'm going to touch on some specific crutch words today, but now that you know what a crutch word is, you'll be able to listen to a broadcast and you'll be able to hear something and say, you know what, I would have said that differently. I would have eliminated that word. Because when you come right down to it, a crutch word is a word that doesn't offer too much. It's like fluff. It's like junk food for our diet. I love Cheez-Its, but it's like eating Cheez-Its. It really is, because it doesn't offer you anything in the way of nutrition. It doesn't offer the listener anything, but it just kind of fills space. It bloats your broadcast. It bloats your belly. That's what a crutch word does. And so we're going to touch on some of the crutch words you may hear on sportscasts. So I'm going to start there. I'm going to start in the sports realm. Here are a few crutch words. I'm going to name 6 of them that you hear on broadcasts right now, and I'm sure you do, and these words have been in broadcasts since the microphone was first turned on, since before Marty Glickman, way back. Red Barber, crutch words have been in use. So here's number 1. The number 1 crutch word you need to stay away from: now. The word now. And here's where you might hear it. Now right wing Anderson dribbles right side, passes back up top to Jones. Now he weaves his way to the left. Now underneath to... Think about that. That word now. As the action is being described on radio, you hear the word now. And Marty Glickman used to sit back in his chair back at WFUV Radio when we would meet with him every week to critique our broadcasts. He would put on the broadcast. This was cassette tapes back then in the mid-90s. And then he would stop it, and he would look at me, and he'd say, or not me, sometimes me, oftentimes me, but not always. It might have been Spiro Ditas or Tony Reale or Connell McShane or one of the other guys that were in that room, and we had so much fun. But he would look at us and say, when else is it going to be? Why do you say the word now? Of course it's now. You're tuned in to listen to the game. It's happening now. You don't have to say it on every pass of the ball. So get that word out of there. And that's true. Think about it. It added nothing to the description. It did not add any context or richness to the descriptive terminology. So get it out of there. The word now is a crutch word you hear a lot, especially on radio, but TV as well. So that's number 1. Number 2, the number 2 crutch word a sportscaster should stay away from: here. We've got a barn burner here at the Rose Hill Gymnasium. The Mets are locked in a 1-1 tie here at Citi Field. Jacob deGrom in a big situation here. Here does not add anything. Of course it's here. Where else is it going to be? The game is taking place. We're in a 1-1 tie at Citi Field. That trims out the fat. That trims out the unneeded word of here. Of course it's here. Rutgers and Michigan tied at 60. 2 minutes left, fourth quarter. We're coming to you from Madison Square Garden. I didn't use the word here. If I say Rutgers and Michigan tied at 60 here, of course it's here. If you're in the arena with me, you know where we are. If you're listening, I can tell you it's Madison Square Garden. That's more descriptive. That helps you, the listener or the viewer, more than the word here. So get that crutch word out of there. Here. Here's one that I used to use, number 3, one of the ones I used to use back when I began my career as an 18-year-old broadcasting minor league professional baseball. The word obviously. Obviously, the Renegades need to get a run here in the 8th inning. They trail by 5. Dwight Gooden in a big spot here. Tie game. A week to go in the regular season. Obviously, he needs to bear down. Obviously, the Rangers need a win here because time is slipping away in their season. Obviously doesn't really add much to it. It doesn't really add anything. And sometimes the points you make are so obvious. Why do you say it? Why do you say they're obvious? Why do you point that out? Unneeded, unnecessary. And sometimes, conversely, you may throw that, as I used to do in my early days. I would throw that word in there and make points that were not so obvious. So in essence, I was talking down to my listener. I would say things such as, obviously Joe Schmo has made great progress this year because he's worked on that two-seam fastball, worked hard before games throughout the season, and he's really come a long way with his technique and working with the pitching coach. Well, I might say that's obviously, but it's only obviously because I've been there early watching it happen. I've been there early talking to the player, Joe Schmo, and talking to the pitching coach. But to my listener, it might not be obvious at all. So if I'm elucidating and I'm giving them some great information, a great tidbit to make my broadcast stand out, the word obviously doesn't add anything and sometimes can talk down to your listener. If they hadn't seen it already, you don't want to make them feel stupid. You don't want to make them feel silly. So get that crutch word out of there, obviously. Here are 2 more that kind of go together. Good and great. We use those words all the time as sportscasters, and it comes down to the fact that we do not have a better, more descriptive word in our repertoire, in our vocabulary, instead of good or great. Good or great usually doesn't tell you much. Great catch by Clark on the left sideline. Yeah, that's fine, but what does a great catch look like? Great one-handed spinning catch as he fell to the ground by Clark on the left sideline. Now I can see that. Great effort that time by Mike Trout as he went back to the warning track. How about great leaping effort as he crashed into the fence by Mike Trout in deep right center field? That I can see. So good and great. The Knicks have been on a good run here. Doesn't really add much. And we all use them. And again, with crutch words, we're never going to completely eliminate them. But as much as possible, try to get them out of your vocabulary. So good and great usually don't mention much. How about this one? You know. And this is kind of one that you hear all the time. It's like, you know. And usually you hear it on sports talk shows. And usually, to be quite frank, usually it's when it's an athlete that's not trained as a broadcast professional. That's when you hear a lot of the ums, ahs, and you know. Because as you work more and more in the field, you are able to eliminate them as much as possible and to a much greater degree. But the reason they occur oftentimes on sports talk shows is because you just have so much time. And it's not easy to talk for 3 hours. And so you do get those crutch words like, ah. And so you want to try to get those out of there as much as possible. So those are 6 that we hear specifically on sports that you can eliminate right now to make yourself a better sportscaster. When we come back, we'll have a bunch more that you probably hear and see every day and drive me nuts.
If you're enjoying the show, check out our 7-hour online sports broadcasting course. We cover play-by-play, talk show hosting, television, and much more. Visit sportscastersclub.com and click on Online Sportscasting Class.
All right, let's talk about some more crutch words. We touched on some that are specific to sports. Now, here, obviously, good, great, and Here are a bunch that we hear all the time, whether you turn on the TV or the radio and you're listening to news, politics, sports, current events, pop culture, whatever it is. Number 1, so. When someone asks you a question and you start with, so the real reason, get that word out of there. Why do you start your answer with the word so? It's annoying. It's needless. Just start your answer. Throwing the word so in there doesn't add anything. All it does, it's like fingernails on the chalkboard. How about this one you probably hear? It's really come in vogue in the past couple years. The words essentially. When you're listening to a talking head talk about the Super Bowl and he goes on and says, well, essentially what the Niners need to do is to really bear down defensively and give Garoppolo a chance to make the most of his 10 or 15 passes a game. Essentially. You hear that word nonstop. And all of these crutch words, they've crept into our popular culture. They've crept into our popular diction. Think about it. When you watch TV, you listen, you're going to see these pop up all the time now. And I'm sorry for being the one to bring them up. And they're going to annoy you as much as they do me. So that's the second one, essentially. I think this is the one that bugs me the most. I don't know why. The word right. Kind of as the self-affirming right that someone throws in after they are making a statement or answering. So, for example, this is a big time of year, right? Because this is when, the Niners have really played their best football. And this is when Garoppolo really needs to step up, right? Because he's got to show that he is a premier quarterback, that he's not just a game manager, right? I mean, when people throw it in that way, it drives me nuts. It's a crutch word that adds nothing. That self-affirming right. Just make your comment. And it's nothing more than a crutch word. But I think sometimes it makes the person using it sound a little bit obnoxious, if you ask me. And so think of that word when the next time you hear it, because you will now. Here's another one. Super. Super. And we even use that word in one of our promos, if you've noticed, here in the Sportscasters Club radio show. Super. This game is super tight. If you download all our books from Sportscasters Club radio show, you'll be super cool. I'll tell you what, this is a fun time of year, but it is super exciting for Mets fans because they have a great young manager. Super. It's one of the newest flavor of the month words that people have been using, almost like 100%, right? When people are, and I just said right, when people are answering questions and they say 100%, that's a crutch word. Like if I say, oh, Tom Brady's the best quarterback ever, and I answer with, oh, 100%. He's definitely the best quarterback ever, what he's done over the years, and blah, blah, blah. But 100% is very much like super. It's a crutch word. And it drives me nuts because be unique. This is the whole point of it. You want to, as a broadcaster, be unique, stand out from the crowd. 20 years ago, maybe if you used some of these words, you would have been unique. Now, you're run-of-the-mill. You're average. You're just like everyone else. If you want to stand out and be unique and make a name for yourself as a sportscaster, don't use these words. All right, the next one, sort of. It's like if I'm talking about let's say the New York Mets, and And this is a way because the Mets, they may have a new owner, and this is sort of a time where they need to, make their identity known. And this is kind of sort of a time when they might go out and spend some money, and the Mets are really excited. Met fans are excited. This is sort of a new day for them. You hear that a lot, sort of. Just kind of a crutch word. I think it's used most often when a broadcaster is trying to string his thoughts or her thoughts and ideas together. And before one word can meet up with the next word, they throw that in there to build a little extra time, an extra second, split second. So sort of is another one. And here's a big one this was big when I was a kid. Gosh, back in the 70s, 80s, 90s, really the 90s. If someone said this word all the time in every sentence they said, you would say, what a dingbat. You would say, what an idiot. What a moron. This person just has no mental capacity. They're not sharp. If someone said the word like all the time, they were a teenager hanging out at the mall all the time, wasting away, wasting their life. Like the Mets need to really step up because they really need to have a great year. And Jacob deGrom is a great pitcher. And Alonso might just be the MVP this year. And like last year, his Rookie of the Year season was awesome. And he's gotten better as a fielder, and it's been pretty cool to watch. And now they have a great manager, and I'm hanging out the ball with my friends, and I just got the new Guess jeans. That's another word. When I'm listening to a broadcaster and I hear that word throughout the broadcast, and I hear it on talk shows, certain people use it a lot, it automatically, in my mind, takes their credibility level and it takes it down 1, 2, 3 pegs. Automatically. And maybe it's not fair, but it's a crutch word they use that in my mind makes them sound less intelligent. And so, don't include that word in your broadcast if you can stand it. That's one that you can really take out of there 100% and just get rid of it because it's unneeded. And finally, as we cap off these crutch words, the 13 crutch words a sportscaster should stay away from, this is one that I really battle with now. And as I mentioned, all broadcasters have some degree of it. A couple episodes ago, I talked about Bob Costas and how he is as close to perfect when a microphone is on as anyone that's ever been in the profession because he hardly ever uses a crutch word. But one that I've battled with currently, if I make the admission, and I'm honest with you, it's just us, so I can do this, is the word really. And if you listen to this broadcast and you listen to previous episodes and go all the way to the beginning here on the Sportscasters Club online radio show, you'll hear that word sprinkled throughout the episodes because that's a crutch word that has worked its way and wormed its way into my vocabulary, really. And I find myself sometimes using that with my kids, with my wife, at home, at work, on the air, wherever I am. It's crept its way in. And I notice it now when I say it, as I do with a lot of these words. Hopefully I don't say the others nearly as much as I say the word really. But does really add anything? No. It's kind of saying, yeah, this is extra important. This point I'm making has a higher level of importance, but it doesn't add anything. I mean, just make the statement with colorful vocabulary and terminology, and you can get rid of that word really and have a much greater impact with your words. Speaking of which, when I was in college, I had a vocabulary book. I still have it over behind me here in my office on my bookshelf. It was a vocabulary book, and I would try to pick out words every day, every week that I would sprinkle into broadcasts. And that was always a fun way to get new words into there. I learned that from Walt Clyde Frazier calling Knick games. And his vocabulary was so diverse and so eclectic, and he would work these words into a broadcast. You don't want to go too far. With Walt, that's his unique thing. But I wanted to have vocabulary at my disposal that I could use that were so descriptive and best met what I was trying to convey. The idea, the thought, the word picture I was trying to convey on radio. Marty Glickman used to use the word as a description. He would use phlegmatic or word of that nature, where he would talk about a player in those words. And you don't always want to use a word that people don't know, because then it can sound sort of condescending. See that? I just said sort of. It can sound very much condescending. But Marty had a great knack of being able to make it natural, and you want it to fit your personality. So those 13 crutch words, stay away from them. I know I still have a lot of work to do on the one, but we can all stay away from them and be better broadcasters. When we come back, only one question today, because that's all we got. You can send your questions to questions@sportscastersclub.com. But today's question is a good one. It is from Tamika in Santa Barbara, California. She asks, well, she has a pretty lengthy email, but I boil it down to, where should I go to college for sports broadcasting? That's a great question, and I will answer it next.
Now it's time for the best part of our show, your questions, our answers. To ask a question for the program, send an email to questions@sportscastersclub.com.
All right, the Sportscasters Club online radio show. Rick Schultz with you. Today's question from Tamika in Santa Barbara, California. Thank you for the email, Tamika. You sent that email to questions@sportscastersclub.com, and you had a great email. I really enjoyed hearing kind of your story and how you're starting your career and what your career goals are. I think you can do it. I really do. But your question basically boiled down to, where should I go to college for sports broadcasting? This could be easily an episode in and of itself. And I am definitely biased because of my time as a student at WFUV Radio at Fordham University in New York City. And then also the time I spent as the sports director at WFUV Radio at Fordham University in New York City. But I will try to answer this question as best I can. I think the simple answer is that there are some premier institutions that have some big built-in advantages, but there's not a one-size-fits-all. There's not a cookie cutter where if you go to one school to study communications or sports broadcasting, you're going to have a great career, and if you go to another, you won't. It's not that simple. I taught at the Connecticut School of Broadcasting for a few years as well, both in Connecticut, in Hasbrook Heights, New Jersey. And we would get students that were in the middle of other careers that would come and build their career from attending a seminar, whether it be that I did or many of the other outstanding instructors at the Connecticut School of Broadcasting. I think Joe Boningo is one of the biggest names to come out of CSB when he began his career with WFAN Radio in New York 20 years ago. So you can certainly do something like that. But there are, whenever students ask me this question, I'm biased towards WFUV for a lot of reasons, but I think there are probably two of the big sports broadcasting schools that I would name. But I'm a big believer in people like Dan Miller and Dave Ramsey and their thought that, and Anthony O'Neill, that you don't have to go to a specific school and pay a boatload of money to get a degree from a specific school to move on and pursue a specific career. Sportscasting is somewhat unique in that the value you gain from the premier institutions is really, and there I go using that crutch word really, it's based on the network of people you ingrain yourself in, the networking, the people you meet. So I'll number one, I'll say Fordham University WFUV Radio. When I was sports director at Fordham, that is the case I made to prospective students when they came in and said, what's so special about WFUV? It's because you're in New York City and you're covering professional games, rubbing shoulders with professionals, and you're doing it in the biggest media market in the world, surrounded by top broadcasters, top media professionals, top athletes, and you're actually doing it in the real world, in real life, as opposed to theorizing about it. So when my students at WFUV would work with WFUV Radio Sports, they would go out and cover the Yankees, the Knicks, the Jets, the Giants. They would be at press conferences. They would be in the dugout. They would be in the locker room after games. They would be covering the teams. And so they would be getting that experience that's priceless. And they would be building relationships that would build and last throughout their career. And so that was the huge, and still is. I mean, WFUV radio in my mind is the number one. And there's also the fact that they're calling games. It's not a student radio station. It's a 50,000 watt station. When the students broadcast a basketball game, that is the Fordham broadcast. There's not a professional set of broadcasters as well. It's the Fordham guys. So that experience and that real world nature of it makes WFUV unique and special. And that's why I've always been biased towards that. Not only when I was a student, but then when I was the sports director at WFUV as well. I also think right there is certainly the Newhouse School, Syracuse University, and just look at the people that it has pumped out over the years, all the way from Marty Glickman to Bob Costas to Mike Tirico and so many others. You really just can't start naming names because you'll leave out so many. A fantastic place for sportscasters to go. Syracuse is kind of in the middle of nowhere. That's the drawback. So you're not covering the professional teams the way that you do at Fordham. But specifically in the area of multimedia and TV, Syracuse has done such a fine job. And you really can't go wrong. And there are certainly a lot of similarities between the two. Some big differences, mainly the geography, what you're doing on a day-to-day basis. But those two, if you go to those two places, you're really sending a message about your career aspiration. You're really setting a great foundation. You're also going to pay a pretty penny for it. So you've got to make that determination as well. You can go to a community college. You can go to a small school. You can go to a public school and still get the base knowledge you need. The real learning with sportscasting is on the job. It's getting out there and doing it. So I'd much rather have somebody who's in the middle of nowhere at a small community college, but that's working their rear end off for free at a local radio station, getting experience on the air, calling games. That is going to be a much better foundation than someone that goes to a huge prestigious sportscasting school and doesn't do anything with it. Obviously, if you go to one of these great schools, if you go to Fordham, if you go to Syracuse, and you put those things to work and you get out there and network and get experience and build your web of influence and make connections with people, that's only going to help. For example, when I went to Fordham, I had already been broadcasting and gotten to know people in the broadcasting business from work that I was doing in professional baseball, minor league baseball. Made relationships, built relationships that way. Chris Carlin was a great influence on my broadcasting career. Eventually, I made the connection through him to become an intern at WFAN Radio in New York and was able to build that. And I still maintain a lot of relationships from people I interned with at WFAN back in 1998. And really, part of it was because I was at Fordham right there in New York City, but part of it was because I was doing it in the summers, calling minor league baseball games and starting the relationship that way. So you can do it either way. There's no right or wrong. But to answer your question, that's a long-winded answer, Tamika. Where should I go to college for sports broadcasting? Those are two great options. Mike Breen was actually the one who recommended Fordham to me way back in the early 90s. And there's not a more classy and more engaged broadcaster for young aspiring sportscasters than Mike Breen, and he is certainly much of the legacy that WFUV Sports is built on. But those are two answers. No right or wrong. You can really go anywhere. It just depends on your hunger and what you do with it for real life experience. When we come back, we're going to wrap this puppy up and say goodbye to another episode of the Sportscasters Club radio show.
Is this the year you want to learn all you can about a sports broadcasting career? Visit our website, sportscastersclub.com, for articles, tips, advice, and a ton of free resources.
Well, I hope you enjoyed today's episode. This has been a lot of fun for me, touching on these 13 crutch words sports broadcasters should stay away from. They really, really should. Really. I hope you enjoyed hearing the crutch words. I hope you can eliminate them from your broadcasts. If you haven't yet picked them up, I hope you never do. But now those 13 words, I know you're going to hear them everywhere. You're going to start hearing those words everywhere you go. You turn on the radio, the TV, you're going to hear the words now, here, obviously, good, great, So, essentially, right? Super, sort of, like, and really. Those are the words that we touched on today. So keep them out of your broadcast. Keep them out of your everyday life. Who wants to hear those words? Just makes you sound silly. Get rid of them, if you ask me. That's my opinion. We're going to have some more great information on our next episode. Thanks for listening today. Please be sure to subscribe to the podcast so it comes right to your phone. You can wake up, open it, and listen to another great episode. Don't even have to think about it. That's what's best. That's what's best for me. When I don't have to think about it, I can't mess it up. Thanks for listening. I'm Rick Schultz, and we'll talk to you next time.
Thanks for listening to the Sportscasters Club radio show at sportscastersclub.com. Don't forget to subscribe so you will never miss an episode. And thanks for liking, sharing, posting reviews, and spreading the word.